I move forward and the room hushes. That's great. Well, welcome to the Huxley College Speaker Series. Our inaugural speaker today is Matt Krogh, and we're very proud to say that this quarter we are focusing on our distinguished alumni, and Matt is one of our distinguished alumni. The speaker series this quarter will be showcasing both the careers that a Huxley degree can lead to for students who are thinking, what will I be able to do in the future? The answer is many, many things. And also provide some information on the extent to which our alumni are helping our community locally, nationally, regionally, at all different levels, in a whole lot of different ways. My name is Jean Melius. I'm a professor in the Environmental Studies Department, and I'm organizing the seminar series this quarter. And Matt Krogh, our speaker today, is particularly distinguished alumnus from my point of view, because I've known Matt for quite a long time. Matt got his environmental science degree here as an undergraduate and also did the environmental education track. And then he came back to get his Master of Science degree in geography. And while he was doing that, he was a TA for one of my classes. It was the worst quarter of my life. I had a funeral to go back to in my hometown in upstate New York. I had root canal. I had everything, and Matt took over and did a great job. I was on his thesis committee, and he has gone on to do wonderful things. Matt is the baykeeper for Resources for Sustainable Communities, and he is also the Northwest Director for the Power Pass Coal Campaign. And so, with no further ado, Matt Krogh is going to tell us about coal at Cherry Point.
Thanks, Gene. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It's actually exciting coming back. This is my third time this week, and I know some classes are requiring this. So if you already had to see me this week, raise your hand. All right, at least three. I'm curious, how many folks are from Huxley? All right, that's great. Gene mentioned that I was gonna talk a little bit about my background. Well, I did get my first degree here in '93, and I will try to operate this device. And that was in environmental ed and environmental science, and then I came back for my master's in geography. And for those of you who are planning career tracks, this is not going to be your straight line career track. I spent time with the Forest Service doing environmental ed and also wilderness work. During my master's program, I ended up in Ukraine, working in a tech transfer project called the Ukrainian Land and Resource Management Center, where we focused on GIS and remote sensing technologies. I worked directing education programs for at-risk youth. It was a combination of trail work and environmental ed, environmental science, trying to get folks graduated. And after that, I ended up doing some freelance writing, mostly on sustainability issues, until finally, who's planning on staying after they graduate? Anyone? Yeah. My experience indicates most of you will actually stay after you graduate, because this town is littered with Huxley graduates. And I'm one of them who stayed. And I was here for probably 16 or 17 years, and I felt like I hadn't given much back. And this job came open, this north-south baykeeper job at Resources, and I got it. And it's been great. So that's my title, North-South Baykeeper. Resources, we do a variety of stuff. We divert construction waste. We advocate for recycling. We work on efficiency programs in schools, work on some climate change issues. And my program is a waterkeeper program. We're part of the Waterkeeper Alliance. It's about 200 programs worldwide. And I'll tell you a quick story about the foundation of the Waterkeeper Alliance, because I think it's funny, I think it's kind of interesting. We've had a big water pollution problem in this country for decades. And going back in the 60s, we had a real problem. You guys remember the Cuyahoga? Wait, some people here might remember the Cuyahoga River catching fire. But we had guys going to Vietnam and coming back. And some of them have been commercial fishermen on the Hudson River. They went back, or they went to Vietnam, they come back years later, and they find out that the Hudson River has been increasingly polluted. They can't fish for their livelihood anymore. And being a bunch of returning vets, they come up with some ideas for what they're going to do about it. There's some discharge pipes they know about. And they come up with ideas like, let's strap some explosives to a raft and float it up that pipe. And we blow it up, and we won't have pollution coming out of that anymore. And then they had, let's strap some explosives to a car, and we'll get it in a rail yard, which is discharging, and blow it up. And so there was some blowing up in the conversation. But At one of their meetings, as they're trying to figure out how to solve the problem, a guy stood up and said, hey, I'm a lawyer. I've been doing some research. There is an act. It's the oldest environmental law in the U.S. called, anyone? No? Rivers and Harbors Act, 1899. It was the first one that actually put a penalty on an environmental discharge. In this case, discharging anything into waters of the state. So these guys used the Rivers and Harbors Act to actually get pollution cleaned up out of the Hudson River. They were able to move forward and actually fish for a living. So the Waterkeeper Alliance comes out of that background. We try to use the Clean Water Act, which was passed in 1972, good, as the basis for our work. But we do a lot more than work with the Clean Water Act. This is you guys have seen those things on Facebook. What I do, what my parents think what I think I do, what my parents think I do, what I actually do. This is my version. We do night beach walks. We get people down to the shoreline, educate them about the marine fauna, flora. We do beach cleanups. That was out at Cherry Point itself. We look for pollution. We patrol actually by boat. We do kayak and canoe patrol. But what I actually do is a lot of email. A lot of email. And so every one of the waterkeeper organizations has an area that they're responsible for. Their name is lake keeper, river keeper. I'm a bay keeper. And our range is from the North Sound, which is here at the mouth of the Skagit River, then all these bays going up to the Canadian border. And the goal is to try to keep water pollution out of that marine water and to actually try to protect habitat. And who can tell me where that arrow is pointing? Cherry Point. Who's been to Cherry Point? Jill, I know you have. Yeah, awesome. It's a beautiful spot. And it's got a whole lot of important ecological amenities, among them sunsets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why Cherry Point is so important. But the unfortunate thing is that the exact same thing that makes it such a dynamic and productive ecological system makes it incredibly attractive to be a deep water port. It's one of the last places on the West Coast where you can actually build a deep water port without dredging. And it's a pain in the butt to get a dredging permit from the Army Corps of Engineers these days. This matters to people. It's also an aquatic reserve. And it's an aquatic reserve primarily for herring recovery, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But what you see on this picture, this primarily green area in the near shore, that's the aquatic reserve itself. These four little cutouts that you see right there, there are 2 oil refineries, 1 aluminum refinery, and the empty one is where, if the permitting process goes forward, we might see North America's largest coal terminal. This is a picture of roughly the same footprint of a coal terminal just across the border. It's called West Shore. It won't look exactly like this if they build it at Cherry Point. This will be in the uplands, and they'll have conveyors going down across that near shore out of that cutout I just showed you. This is roughly 80 acres of coal. These guys transport around 25 million tons of coal a year through this facility. For Cherry Point, they're proposing roughly 48 million tons. Also note the ship is really big. I'm going to talk about big ships a little bit later. Actually, it's all really big. Oh, yeah. Not to be boy-like and obsessed with large things and machinery, but I got to go on a tour of this place, and you see these. First off, there's the train tracks. Then there are the large yellow arms. The buckets on the end of those things are so big they hold 17 tons of coal each. You can't even see the buckets. Or at least I can barely see the buckets in these pictures. They're huge. And all of these stacker reframers, they're called, are currently operated by one person with a computer and a control room that's been built there since this picture was taken. It's a pretty cool facility overall. I don't want one, but it's cool. And likewise, all these same ecological characteristics that made it so productive have also made it productive for people who have lived there for thousands of years. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fisheries. This picture is taken from a ceremony in September when the Lummi Nation, who have lived there since time immemorial, came out in opposition to the coal terminal. Later in this talk, so to start with, I'll talk about how we got to this point, why we have this coal terminal proposal in front of us. I'll mention direct impacts, both from trains and vessel traffic. We'll talk a little bit about resistance, and then just a little bit about what you can do, should you wish, to resist the coal terminal. So what we have here, for once, is an incredible local issue, people on both sides of it talking about all these details having to do with it, and this is so much part of a global problem, global issue, that it's stunning, and we're right in the middle of it. So no matter how you feel about it, it's actually an exciting time to be here. And if you're a Huxley person, and you're thinking about working in regulation, if you're thinking about working in advocacy, and I work in both right now, if you're working in science, if you know, no matter where you're going, if you're working in policy, there is so much of every one of those components that spending time studying this issue, I think is worthwhile. So now we're going to go from global to local. Who's been paying attention to the news? You guys have heard about the smog in Beijing? It's partly caused by coal, partly caused by current weather conditions, but we have a lot of coal contamination around China. We have huge air quality issues. This particular day was 2 days ago. So with the picture of the folks doing Tai Chi was 2 days ago. They had particulate matter at 2.5 microns. Safe level on any given day was under 25. They were seeing levels over 700. They've been fairly well sustained. It's a huge human health problem. That's happening in the context of this. The 9th warmest day for the world on record. I'm sorry, year. The warmest year on record, the United States. Rising global land ocean temperatures, and of course, the one on the bottom right here is Hurricane Sandy, which followed the track of the excessively warm water off the seacoast. So in the context of that, why are we talking about a coal terminal of this size? And just a quick calculation, who knows how many tons of CO2 equivalents you get from 48 million tons of coal? What do you got?
48 million times 44 twelfths.
44 twelfths? I think it's halfway. It's roughly that. So we get near 100 tons of CO2 equivalents, which happens to be the entire economic output, roughly, of all human activity in the state of Washington. So for those of you who are working in efficiency and trying to improve gas mileage, if you're at the DRI, or you're working in other kinds of efficiency, first stop the coal terminal, and then work in efficiency. So why are we here? Why are we even having this conversation? It's because of this. This is electricity generation in the United States, and it's the fuel mix. And you'll note that the blue one, which is coal, goes through 2000, well, it got 12 there, and it actually keeps going down to the end of 2012. So coal companies, they're losing market. They're looking for more. Where are they going to find market? Note the red line. That's Asia. If they can get coal to market in Asia, they don't have to worry as much. Right now, if you're a company, you've borrowed money, you have to pay back that money, or you're leveraging your investments, you actually have to grow. And if you can't grow, you're going to go out of business. So every one of these coal companies that is dependent on selling thermal coal in the United States for power is looking for new markets. And the market they want is the Asian Pacific market. That's why we have this. You guys have heard about the one terminal that we're proposing here? Have you heard about the other 5? Yeah? So every one of them, as far as we know, we don't know a lot about the Coos Bay proposal, but every one of them is proposed by a different coal company. They have different rail associated with them. Although Burlington North is associated with, I think, 3 of them. But we're looking at this Powder River Basin to the east. They're trying to find ways to get that Powder River Basin to market to sell it to Asia. They can go through the Gulf, but it's more expensive. This is a price-sensitive commodity. So what they want to do, they want to get as close to Asia as they possibly can and export from there. But we're not going to talk about those 5 or 6. We're going to talk about 1. You guys know the sponsors of this, SSA Marine, Burlington Northern, Peabody Coal. You know, they've been behind it for a couple years now, and realistically, the thing that I'm most concerned about, and I'll tell you, I'm an advocate. I'm going to try to present you with accurate information. But I'm focused on impacts. I'm focused on negative impacts. And that's what I'm going to talk about right now. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what it looks like in the Powder River Basin, talk about the impacts of the trains, get to the terminal, talk about the impacts of the terminal, and talk about what we're doing about it. So first off, my friend Paul Anderson, he's a photographer locally. He's been traveling the train route, taking pictures. He's taking pictures here. We did a tour of West Shore together. I mentioned that we did West Shore. That's the coal terminal across the border. This is the North Antelope Mine in the Powder River Basin. It's operated by Peabody Coal. And there are 2 things I want you to register from this. One is, again, because I'm a boy, I think big things are really cool. You see the dump truck in the middle there? You guys can see it, right? There's a dump truck in the middle. And if you can see it, you will know the tires have got 10 to 12 foot range tires. These are massive mines. I just want to give you scale. And as a water quality guy, I look at the filling of the valleys here. I worry deeply about the impacts on the water quality there. And I also know that for this entire region, of the areas that are supposed to have reclaimed and restored the original use, so far they've restored 4%. And they can't restore original use. Part of what happens when you take this apart is you destroy surface aquifers, which of course, provide water both for farming and ranching for the folks who used to farm and ranch there. So this, to me, in particular as a water quality guy, is a problem. This is how they get it out of there. Some of the biggest trains on the rails, they're up to 1.5 miles long. They actually get longer elsewhere, but for grade reasons, we're not going to see them here. And they're going to bring somewhere around 20 at the very max, bless you, at the very maximum, if they build out this whole terminal, it could be as many as 20 trains a day, 10 full, 10 empty, coming through our region. Things we worry about are safety impacts, trying to get across tracks at grade crossings. That bottom right picture, may be hard to see for you guys, but you're seeing diesel exhaust there. We're concerned about the health impacts of diesel exhaust. And noise. And one funny thing about this picture, you never know what people are going to do when you take their picture, but all these people at this table, including that guy who's smiling, had their hands over their ears when the train was going by until he saw his picture being taken. At which point he took his hands down and started smiling. This is taken in Edmonds. And right now, we have an opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit later about writing what's called a scoping comment for EIS. Have folks done their EIA classes yet? Anyone? A couple? Yeah, so right now we're in a process, and I'm going to go into it a little bit more later, where you have an opportunity to provide input into the environmental impact statement for this project. You also, until February 4, have the opportunity to provide input to the Tongue River Railroad and the Otter Creek Mine. Just the Otter Creek Mine, which is at the beginning of this rail. It would feed coal onto the system. And back there, just like here, it's dividing farmland. Back there, we have at least 3 families on the new route for the rail coming out of it who will face eminent domain and have their land taken away from the ranches solely to provide coal for private corporations. Who knows what this is? Only the locals. This is right at the end of Chucknut Drive. It's a beautiful spot. If you guys bike or if you hike, I encourage you to head down that way. Who knows where this is? All right. So along the line, one of the things that we're really concerned about are the economic impacts of trains separating communities, dividing communities. Right here in Bellingham, we have a single case study, and that is the Waterfront Redevelopment. It has a potential redevelopment. It has 5 access points. 4 of them are grade crossings. One of them, you get over a train as a bridge. Doesn't really hold big trucks. But in order to actually develop this area, we're going to have to spend a lot of public money trying to mitigate the impacts of coal trains if they're coming through. Frankly, I don't think it'll be an attractive prospect. Just like the other 1,100 miles of rail, you're going to find communities over and over who've been writing in scoping comments, just like you can, about their concerns about the impacts of the trains on their communities. So this is where I get really excited. Trains are fun. I actually like trains. Trains are very efficient. They're a great form of transportation. But I care about water. I care about the state of the sea. So this is what's done. And it's the vessel traffic that it would take to move 48 million tons of coal from this facility to markets somewhere in Asia. The Cape ships, they're the biggest ships on the seas. They're actually so big they can't go to the Panama Canal. They go around the Cape in South America. And this is the largest ferry that serves the San Juan. It's about 2,500 tons, 1,000 passengers. And that's the one I actually had to go on. It's called the Cape Violet, 180,000 tons. They're massive ships. And they go through narrow, fairly crowded channels. You guys recognize the spot? Yes? Yeah, good. San Juan Islands. On the west side of the San Juan Islands is Harrow Strait. On the east side is Rosario Strait. These are the 2 primary channels that deep draft vessels go through. They're fairly crowded now. We haven't seen any accidents lately, but we've seen some in the last 10 years. But they're also crowded with other things. Who knows what this is? Yeah, good. Who has seen, and this is not a trick question because I want a copy if you have, who has seen a tourist brochure for the state of Washington that didn't have workers on it? Really?
Ferndale's.
Or not anymore, yeah. So one of the things that I'm deeply concerned about when I look at this project and some other projects that are coming down the pike is the impact on marine wildlife. There's a number of ways that you see those impacts. One of them is impacts on the food chain. And we'll talk a little bit about herring, but what you should know is that the focus at the top of the food chain, this is a very, very simple version for those of you who have studied biology, but at the bottom are crayfish, like herring, also sand lance and surf smelt in this area, various species of salmon, and of course the orca dependent on those. Who knows what this is? Who can read the red underlined part? Yeah, so these are Cherry Point Pacific herring. They are abundant at Cherry Point, and in fact they used to spawn along this entire shoreline. This is their former range. For whatever reason, whether it's industrial effluent or sea surface temperature changes, we don't know, actually. We'd like to have the studies. Their range is dramatically constrained now. There's much less at Point Roberts. There's a few spots at Point Whitehorn, which is the obvious point sticking out in the middle there. But realistically, their numbers have plummeted. We're not sure why, but putting a coal terminal in this area, and I'll show you why in a minute, will actually dramatically impact their spawning ability. This is what's happened to the Cherry Point Pacific herring. So this is actually, we should take this back to 72. I'll fix this graph later. In 72, there were over 15,000 tons of spawning biomass. That was nearly half of the herring and the Sailor Sea. Incredibly important and uniformly abundant crayfish, which have seen their population plummet. One of the reasons we have that reserve, and I mentioned this before, is to restore those herring runs. We're trying to get it back up to at least 5,000 tons, which we think would be the actual sustainable population. But this is what we're looking at today. There's something else we're worried about as we look at tanker traffic, as we look at bulker traffic, that's what we call the big bulk carriers, as we look at other traffic coming through these relatively crowded channels. Oil spill risk, the obvious impacts and the ongoing impacts of, in particular, crude oil on the ecosystems. Invaders, who can tell me how we get invaders from bulk carriers here? Yeah? Ballast water, good. What else? What here? Is that you?
Yeah, on the bowl.
Yeah. So it's about half and half, or 40-some% we think come in on the skin of these carriers, which we can't really do anything about. Ballast water, they're supposed to exchange about 200 miles offshore in international waters. Guess how much enforcement there is? We were in my class earlier. It's about a half-time inspector right now. So we don't have really good ways to control invaders from foreign waters. And you were there. Why are the bulkers a particular problem? So all sorts of ships have ballast water, right? The bulk carriers, here's the problem. They're transporting bulk. They take it across the Pacific, they leave off the bulk. What are the chances of picking up something equally bulky to bring back? They don't. They come back empty. So in order to be safe at sea, they take on a bunch of ballast water, up to about 17 million gallons per larger ship. Anybody swim in the salt water around here? Yeah? Can you hear ships going by?
It's, I died at the end of the Disparity, and that's...
Oh, really? Yeah, so one of the things that we're worried about is marine noise pollution. These same narrow channels, and narrow means about 15, 20 miles wide in some of these cases. You see that the sound amplified, reverberating, whatnot. The amount of noise that we could expect from these tankers, we would worry about actually driving away marine mammals like orcas. And now this is an exciting couple of pictures for me because I got to be there with the guy taking them. We were on the loading gantry for these ships. Or for this ship. This is again Kate Violet, you saw the profile picture earlier. And one of the things that was exciting about it was that we had been assured by one of the PR folks for the coal company that there would be no spilling of coal during the loading process because they have a nozzle that goes in and spreads it around, and then it goes to the next one, and we won't have coal coming out. Those decks are supposed to be white. It was not a windy day, and there was coal everywhere. And so when we talk about herring, which I'm going to keep saying herring, I love the herring, but they're uniquely sensitive to PAHs. Who's got PAH? What's the acronym? Not you. So polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They're abundant in coal, and herring embryos can actually see mortality, or at least malformation, at 1 to 2 parts per billion. So when we talk about spreading fine coal dust in the areas where the herring are going to be spawning, potentially, this is a real problem. This is also a problem. Again, this is the same terminal I showed you before. It's the West Shore Terminal. It's at sea level. It's exposed to the winds. We don't know how much more exposure to wind or less exposure to wind it would actually have in the uplands. One of the reasons why you saw that coal on the deck is when you have a breeze blowing across, and a stronger and stronger breeze blowing across a hole like that, it actually creates a suction which pulls the dust as they're loading out, or the freshly loaded dust out. So imagine putting these same piles in an area, blowing wind across the top of it. We don't know what will happen. But I'm going to show you something decidedly unscientific, and that is not this picture. This picture, you guys recognize where this is? Point Roberts, Swanson Ferry, West Shore Terminal. So when we first started talking publicly about this issue about 2 years ago, I got a call from a guy. And, we'd had a lot of calls from people who were, we were new, we hadn't been talking much about the issue, but people knew that we were paying attention, so they were calling to tell us their concerns. We had a guy call to tell us how great the West Shore Terminal was, and he was a window washer from Bellingham, who had been getting all kinds of business traveling up to Point Roberts and the marina up there to clean boats and windows. He's like, yeah, there's coal dust everywhere. One assumes that small amounts accumulating over time. But so what I did was I drew a circle. And because it's on this picture and because it's a really nice circle, you may think that it's a scientific circle. It's not. I said, here's the center of the coal terminal, here's Point Roberts Marina, how far can dust go? And it looks like that. So when we talk about dust that we know is spreading some distance, you just saw the picture of dust blowing off in a freakish 25-mile-an-hour gust, according to the terminal. You can see it blanketing that entire nearshore ecosystem, but we also see the finer particles float and move with the currents and upcoating other areas, other beaches. So I did the same thing here. Again, unscientific. We don't know how this terminal will compare to the other one. You guys see the, I assume you can see the 3 docks there? Yeah, so the gap in between is where they'd be building this terminal. And so, so there you go. So there's a 5-mile circle. It's not scientific, but we know that there's potential for coal dust to spread that far. We know that it could impact Birch Bay, and we know, you guys remember I just showed you the spawning areas for the Cherry Point Pacific herring? We're going to see coal dust potentially blanket that entire area if we get coal dust out during spawning season, which is April, May, June for those guys. So I have this picture in here because we talked a lot to project proponents who talk about the difference between U.S. environmental laws and how effective they are, and Canadian environmental laws. I just showed you the Canadian terminal. I'm sorry to say, this one's in the United States. This picture was taken by another waterkeeper from the Mobile Bay keeper. And the coal dust, or the black streaks that you see in the water, are coal dust. They've been repeatedly shut down for their coal dust discharge. We see a dust problem at every single one of these terminals we've looked at. So here's where we get a little bit more global. I'm focused on the local issues. We got into it because my organization had been working to try to protect Cherry Point for 10 or 11 years as part of bringing in the aquatic reserve, getting an aquatic reserve management plan going. We have a couple committees working with the aquatic reserve right now, if any students are interested. But you can't stay local for all that long once you have a project that has so many scales. So we started looking at the other issues. So what you see here is the ocean. And pretty much every boat or every vessel that comes out of Washington comes out and takes a right-hand turn. And in order to get to China or that area in the shortest possible route, most of them take the Great Circle route that, believe it or not, goes up to the Aleutians. You guys see the Aleutians there under the words Bering Sea. And they go through a couple places, but one in particular that's a problem. It's called Unimak Pass. Unimak Pass is about 8 miles wide at its narrowest. You're plugging a bunch of very large draft vessels through there. It's the entryway to the Bristol Bay fishery. It's about a $1.5 billion fishery every year. And we're concerned that when you talk about impacts of this, you can talk about mitigating some things, right? You can talk about driving across a grade crossing where you can build a bridge. The taxpayers will pay for most of the cost of that bridge, but you can do it. There are some things that are incredibly hard to mitigate. subsurface noise. I showed you that one picture. We can't mitigate that. The real risks out here and the cost we take, it might be possible, but it's highly unlikely that we can mitigate the very real oil spill risk in a place like this that's so remote, that has real impacts on fisheries. And this is sort of the end game, right? We are sending coal to another country which actually have good environmental laws in the books. And for those of you who are going into policy, our environmental law, bear in mind, and this is sort of our mantra at work for me, is that a law without enforcement isn't a law. So what you see here, massive air emissions, we talked about that. We also see coal ash and the issues with coal ash discharge that are uncontrolled. Coal ash, of course, is essentially distills out most of the components that we're worried about in coal, except for the CO2. And this is my buddy Jin Hao. For those of you who think that the Chinese are clamoring to get our coal, they're not. Jin Hao came over in May. He's one of 20 water keepers over there, precisely to let us know that they don't want our coal, that they actually want to have more expensive coal so that they can focus on renewables. China right now is investing more in renewables than any other country in the world. And we want to keep them going that way. That's one of the things that's so important about this project, is when you talk about the weekly decisions that are being made about energy in China, you know, I don't know if this estimate is true. I'm told that they're building about one coal-fired power plant a week. These coal-fired power plants last for 30, 50, 80 years. So every week they're making a decision that has that kind of time frame for impact. So if we are providing cheap coal everywhere around the Pacific Rim, we have 4 or 5, one major port here in Washington, Oregon. We have more ports, Indonesia, Australia, making sure that they have a robust supply of cheap coal. They're going to continue investing in coal-fired power plants. We want to see them continue their path that they're on right now, which is a great path, and they're spending far more than we are on renewables. And if anybody wants to see this talk, it was actually a great talk. This is on YouTube, and it's the Columbia Riverkeeper. It's his webpage or their webpage. So Columbia Riverkeeper, all one word. So here's the bottom line. We got to this point right now. It's been actually 20 years in the making. This proposal in its core form for a pier and wharf there, plus something in the uplands, was proposed in '92. And we've gone through successive iterations. There have been lawsuits, the regulations changed, the aquatic reserve was put in place. All these things have happened. We got to this point right now where a couple of years ago, they submitted their current application, the JARPA, the Joint Aquatic Resource Permit application. And it took a long time to get to the point where just this September, we actually started the scoping period for the environmental impact assessment. Anybody know? You guys, only one person has done the EIA, right, process. I won't pick on you then, unless you want to tell us what scoping is.
We just talked about it. Well, it probably comes from it, figuring out what impact we could have, or what issues
Yeah, great. So realistically, scoping is where the public at large has the opportunity to either write in. We had 7 hearings, which had a total of about 9,000 people attend. It was impressive. It's a time that you can actually state your opinion about what the environmental impact statement should look at. We're essentially getting all together and crowdsourcing the outline for the EIS. That's what it is. And you have until the 22nd to submit comments. I'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, we're in this permitting process, and Jean and I have been arguing about, or Dr. Melius, for those of you who don't know her, we've been arguing about what permitting means. I think it means they need our permission. She, speaking hypothetically from the industry side, says it means, well, you're going to permit it, so what do we have to do to get you to permit it from the industry side? This is what I think, that we actually have an opportunity to state what our concerns are, to look at our values, and see whether or not we want to give permission to build this coal terminal. And that's where Power Pass Coal comes in. I mentioned on the North Sound Baykeeper, you know, I've been working on local water quality issues, but as things have gone along, we've ended up getting hooked up with groups around the region. And I'll talk about how it started, but Power Pass Coal at core, it's a coalition, it's a campaign trying to prevent coal export from the west coast of North America. It started like this. We had a few of us. We had one proposal in Longview. Did anybody hear about Longview? If you just guys only, yeah? So Longview was a small proposal, 5 million tons, but they hadn't considered a number of important impacts, including climate change and their SEPA documents. And they were challenged legally, and when we got the documents, it turns out they were lying. They didn't want to build a 5 million ton coal terminal. And if you're planning to go into industry, by the way, don't put things like this in writing. What they wrote, and they put it in their email, was, well, we're not actually trying to build a 5 million ton coal terminal. Nobody will actually allow us to build it if we tell them we want to do 60 million or 80 million tons. So we'll save 5 million tons, and then they'll let us start, and then we'll expand. It's actually in an email. So if you're going to be a wrongdoer, nefarious person, don't write it down. Just say it to people who aren't reporting it. So as we got further into this issue of Longview and Cherry Point, we actually realized that we needed help. We needed to talk to people along the rail line. And so we brought in Northern Plains Resource Council, which has been working trying to protect ranches and farms in Montana and Wyoming for about 40 years now. There's a larger group, the Western Organization of Resource Councils, that includes Northern Plains. 2 Canadian groups have actually been helping out because they have their own concerns with West Shore and also concerns about exporting our coal. And then it got silly. Then we got a lot of people signed on. And we now have about 110 organizations signed on. Represents over 500,000 members in the Washington, Oregon area. And we're working really hard to try to make sure that people have a choice, that they understand. You know, I've already told you I'm opposed to the terminal, but I do want everybody to understand what the issues are and have a choice whether or not to support. And this is kind of what we do with people.
You put masks on them?
We put masks on people. You too can wear a mask. This is the first one with Bill and Kevin that we had 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago in Fairhaven. We had about 1,000 people. At the bottom one, that's about 300 people, and it was unprecedented. This is an event the likes of which has never been seen, because although there's a rally there, it's at Bellingham High School, the truth is that it was for something that we haven't had before, we might not have again, and that is a pre-scoping informational hearing. Not only was it, so the scoping hearings are informational hearings. People are so concerned around here, again, on both sides of the issues, about what was going to happen during scoping, that 6 months in advance, they gave us an informational hearing and 800 people turned out. 800 people. This is actually supposed to support ecology and the other agencies that were involved. And so what do we do with all the people? Why? Because as we go through this process, there are a bunch of decision points, and we want people as informed as possible as those decision points come forward. One person who can make a decision all on his own is the current Commissioner of Public Lands, Peter Goldmark. He can choose to issue or not issue a lease at the Aquatic Reserve. The governor, I have this generic at the time because I didn't know there was going to be governor when I wrote the slide. We have ecology or fish and wildlife. They can direct those agencies to look more closely at issues. The Army Corps has jurisdiction over the wetlands at Cherry Point. There's about 162 acres that would be either filled or degraded if this project goes forward. The Whatcom County Council will vote it someday on permits, 2 different permits. And of course, the ones in red right here, ecology, the Army Corps, and Planning and Development Services, are the ones who together are considering the EIS, the co-leads in the EIS process. And then, we periodically like to talk to the federal delegation, that's our representatives and senators. We're trying to get them to advocate for a programmatic EIS or an area-wide EIS that actually looks at all these terminals in combination. And this one I threw in because this is where I have a lot of sympathy for the project proponents. For those of you who are going to be going into regulatory work or environmental regulation, this is the project proponent's permitting pathway, and it's actually the basic version of it. There's a lot of steps, and there's a lot of work they have to do. And scoping is the second column right here. It's where we are. And we're currently 2 years behind their original schedule. So this is my one vote of sympathy. And this is a pretty picture. I've showed you a lot of ugly pictures. I love this picture from across Bellingham Bay. I think as we talk about this, people will talk about the economics of it. They'll talk about impacts. We'll talk about climate change. You can pick your issues around this, talk about human health along the rail. But the reality is that I think there are so many impacts that one of the questions we have to have a community conversation about which values we want to support. And for me, I want to pick the green, clear air values. Not at any cost, but I think it's a fairly clear choice in this case. This is where we're going, and I hope we're continuing there. So, I'll wrap up my talk with this. What you can do right now. I mentioned scoping. It's actually really easy. You don't have to be a professional. If you have a concern that you want them to look at, you can say, please look at this concern. So that nocoal.net website That's actually it'll redirect you to the Powerhouse Coal site. You'll get a form email that you can edit. So you could actually click 3 times and submit a scoping comment and never know what you were writing. I don't advocate it. I want you to go in, if you're going to do this, take a look at it, write your own. Another thing you can do is write your own, and my friend Jill, can you wave? Jill over there, she has a bunch of scoping comment forms. If you want to write your own, if you want to think about it a little bit, there's some good directions on it. It'll help you out. There's the form. It's easy. It's fun. And we're still trying to get people to write more scoping comments. By all means, come sign up. You can always either call Matt or sign up on here. And you know, there's a whole lot going on right now. That's not just our culture. It's hydrocarbon-based power broadly. And we have people working on investment actions across this country, college students talking to each other, arguing about the issue, trying to decide whether or not their school should also divest from oil, from coal, from gas. And letters to the editor, another wonderful thing. No matter where what your perspective is, I encourage you to write in, because it's the most read part of the paper, and if you want to actually get your name out there and have people hear what you're thinking, writing a letter to the editor is a great way to go. So with that, let me just wave a couple things at you. Actually, I'm not going to wave too much, but every one of the things I'm talking about, it gets more current every day. This is today's article about oil spill risk from vessel traffic in the Sailor Sea. It came out today in the Canadian paper. Forbes, the noted liberal rag, yesterday, talking about the issues with coal combustion in China and human health. And this one is the issues with sonar and sound in Haro Strait and Rosario Strait, and the issues between the Canadian Coast Guard and the U.S. Coast Guard. These issues are current every day. So if you guys are looking for projects or research projects, this is one that just keeps on giving. So thank you very much, and I will take questions.
Let's take it.